thought today we would finally talk about OpenClaw, which has sort of taken the industry by storm. I've mentioned it a couple times in passing, mostly around security. I was waiting a little bit for things to, one, get tamper down a bit, and maybe some maturity, I guess, in some of the packages that were released, having played with it a little bit and was honestly quite impressed with what it was doing on my home network, but also was a little bit scared of it. So I had put on a Tailscale, Tailnet, and done things like that. And I think I guess maybe the turning point was last week. There was a new update essentially that came out, and a bunch of things changed. But what I ended up doing, I'll show you the repo a little bit here. It's a very popular project. I think it's surpassed Linux, for example, in terms of stars. So it's a pretty big project is the main thing that I was a little bit lenient about. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And, it's also really popular. And there's security issues in the community with them being hosted publicly, for example. And I think when I installed it, I tried to UPnP open up port 22, for example. So I was a little bit cautious about where it should be installed, how to containerize it, what I should do, etc. And what it came down to was I wanted to install it without any plugins, which is what I did. So I went through and installed OpenClaw on a few of my Raspberry Pis here at home. And then I got to thinking, what if they could talk to each other? Is there any benefit in having them talk to each other or coordinating each other or maybe being able to hand off tasks or what have you? I think the real problem, Jason, is that in the back of my mind, I'm still trying to go Bezos mode with Gastown. And maybe that's the issue, is that this is a different tool and I don't need to use it that way. But I want to. I think that seems to be the way that I can use things, like divvying off tasks to little computers and maybe having them check on a to-do list or what have you. So that's OpenClaw itself. And I just want to quickly give you an overview of what I was using. So the other is I've been looking at a lot of these models that are, we'll call them like non-US models or multi-language models. There's a few of them coming out of APAC, for example, that are pretty powerful. I look a lot at like SweBench or TermBench or things like that when it comes to coding or terminal tools. And Qwen 3.5, I think, was the one that a lot of people started using, or Qwen 3 Coder next, which is the one under here. I started playing around with one that's a little bit further down the list here. It's called Kimi-K2 or Kimi-K2.5. Now, this hit the news recently because I think one of Cursor's models was based off of this, or maybe was distilled off of Kimi-K2. The other one that's pretty powerful, which is at the top of the list here, is MiniMax 2.7. Now, full disclosure, I used more MiniMax M2.5 than 2.7, and I think 2.7 uses MiniMax 2.5 to make itself or what have you. I will also say that in playing with this with OpenClaw, I didn't really get very far. I ended up sticking with Kimi-K2.5, so this one down here. You're probably wondering, why am I on the Ollama page? Well, the reason I'm here is because I wanted to host this model myself, personally, on my own network, so it didn't leave the network. Everything that I did was private. But it turns out this model is actually quite big. On the other hand, having gone through like a lot of the work setting up skills and that kind of stuff, it seemed like something I did want to use and something that worked really well with OpenClaw. So I was trying to figure out ways that I could have it hosted maybe in a region that's closer to home, or maybe from a provider that I'm already using. Since I already use Ollama, I figured, hey, this data is already going there. It should be fine. They've got a disclaimer saying they don't train on the data I send them, which should be okay. We'll get to why that's important in a moment, but I think I've discussed in the past that I consistently seem to be leaking Datadog, dog food account, like my own personal account, API keys. And as a result, I'm really worried about just setting up a random provider and sending that data, especially if they're training on it, because the onus is on me, I guess, at that point in time, once I've leaked a key, to make sure I go in and recover it or get rid of it or deep six it, get out of all existence. Okay, so what I was doing was setting up OpenClaw and using Ollama models. Now, the way I did this was installing Ollama locally on Raspberry Pis, which I should be able to show you here in a moment. All right, now, sorry, there's a lot of text going on here. What I'm going to do is quickly send out a prompt so we can see what's going on, but I've got a number of Raspberry Pis. In fact, I've got 14 of them. I lost the switch, so I can only use about 6 of them right now because they're all PoE. But what I did on them each was install Datadog, and then I installed Ollama. I set it up at Kimi-K2, and then I installed OpenClaw and had them all talking to each other. So when OpenClaw is running, what I want from Datadog is a way to trace everything it's doing. So be it a prompt or a call to Ollama using the the OpenAI API. So it looks like OpenAI, even though it's not. Now, one of these Pis is really, really small. small. It was a Pi 4 with 1 GB of memory. That is the only one that talks directly to Ollama Cloud. But for the rest of them, because a newer version of OpenClaw allows you to use local Ollama hosted models, and in fact, Kimi-K2.5 and MiniMax 2 work really well with this. This is sort of, it felt like a conflation of a lot of things happening at the same time. Now, I just sent out a prompt here, and what I asked all the agents was to let me know what their temperatures are. What I'm using is IRC. This is a pretty old chat network. I know I'm probably dating myself a little bit here, but what I was able to do in IRC, and I'll show you the package that I'm using here. So I'm using Ergo Chat. What I was able to do was host this locally. So this is all running on my NAS outside of all the Raspberry Pis with OpenClaw because I didn't want them touching the configuration of what's behind them. But I'm running two things. So one of them is this IRC server called Ergo. Ergo is a Go-based IRC server, not client, that is MIT licensed. So I felt like I could, grab it down and change it if I want to. But also it allows all of the Pis to connect to them. Now, one thing, unfortunately, here is that the Pis don't have like an adapter or a plugin or what they call a channel to talk to IRC automatically, as far as I could tell. But I was able to essentially vibe code a little bit of an add-on there to essentially allow it to participate in channels, not direct messages. Those don't work so well so far, but basically just talking in a channel. And the reason I did this is because I want this offline. The first time I installed OpenClaw, I was using it on WhatsApp so I could play with it on the plane while I was going to a different country, et cetera, et cetera. That was cool, but it also maybe it was a bit of an alarm bell for me in terms of security because there's a lot that could happen once it was publicly exposed. So what I decided I'd do is I set up a local chat server. If you're trying to do this on your own, I think Matrix might be the one to look at. Matrix is fairly nicely licensed, as well as it looks like Slack, is very similar to Slack's interface. You can log on to it remotely if you'd like to, if you want to federate with other Matrix servers, or it can be local only, and it's built into OpenClaw, so it's got support for it already. I think another one is Mastodon, I believe, is one of those that you can play with, or Discord, or Telegram, or what have you. Personally, I want something that was really private, that did not have remote access at all, and then I could deal with remote access on Tailnet or what have you. Sorry, it's a big explanation about how the network works, but each of these is logged in. Now, I've got two NASs on here. They're a little bit different. So I've got an i7 NAS and an i9 NAS, and both of these have a Datadog agent tool called pup. So use pup to get your metrics. And what they can do is, using pup, they can go to Datadog, grab the metrics, and then let me know what's going on. Now, I could do this myself. I could use an MCP server as well. But the goal that I'm trying to do is have the agents aware of essentially the overhead of what they're doing to themselves. So if they decide to start off kind and set up a Kubernetes server and start spinning up things, that they're aware of the overhead when they do it. I know this is like really convoluted at this point. I've kind of set up a silly system where they have access to only one model and one provider for metrics, and they can do a few things locally. But what I want them to be able to do is, one, be introspective, look at themselves, and two, look at the rest of the cluster to make sure that if they're full, that they could send things off to another. Kind of like load balancing, but more like load shedding or sharing in this case. All right, now in this case, you can see we're using the same model, but they're different computers and we're getting different results. Now, in this case, one of them did, in fact, go to PUP and get some metrics. The other one said it's not reporting its own metrics somehow, which doesn't really make sense. It does have its own app keys. But what I'm going to do here, if you played around with OpenClaw at all, it's got two documents that are pretty interesting. By default, if you don't go through onboarding, you won't fill out your soul.md and you won't fill out your identity.md. So these are, the soul is kind of like, I might get a little bit frilly here, but it's the essence of your agent. And then the identity might be its name or what have you, or some proclivities that it has in terms of the way that it communicates. What I did was told all of these agents to talk to them each other and then figure out if they've actually got an ID that should be smaller for token spend. So for example, one of these is the digital greyhound. That's a lot of tokens. Maybe they could discuss amongst each other if there's a way to reduce the tokens. Now, of course, you're thinking, hey, doesn't this cost a fortune talking to Ollama Cloud, because you've got, I don't know, it looks like 7 or 8 agents here talking to each other. And what I'll say is that the Ollama Cloud, this is not a sales pitch at all, but they're what you get for the monthly fee is fairly liberal. Like you get a lot of queries and calls. I've yet to get a quota problem or an increase on budget or any of those things. I think perhaps what they're doing right now is trying to get people onto the cloud. The other that you'll notice is that this is often faster than Opus 4.6 or Sonnet 4.6, for example. I find that ChatGPT is pretty quick, but I do find that those two in particular, probably because they're popular, are a little bit slower to respond. Kimi-K2, hosted on Ollama, and MiniMax M2.7 for that matter, are quite fast to give you that first token and continue. The other thing you're probably noticing here is that the vibe coded channel adapter for IRC has one, it's got a cutoff issue. It does sometimes cut off these sentences. Two, they flow into a new sentence, which is okay. But three, sometimes they don't. So it might be cut off completely. So there are bugs in this implementation, but you can see that they're talking amongst each other and looking at each other's host names or their soul or their identities and arguing about like the tokens and what have you. So it's kind of fun. Again, just a big experiment, but the whole thing I was trying to do was one, prove I could host OpenClaw quote unquote safely, so it wasn't access to the internet. Two, that I could set up a cluster of them. Now, this is something that OpenClaw is trying to put forward in terms of like multi OpenClaws working at the same time. Currently, what they've got is it's more like a master node or primary node relationship. So if you had one primary OpenClaw, you could have many nodes associated to it. But for me, like these pies aren't, they're going to overheat. They could have problems, et cetera, et cetera. I couldn't designate any one of them as the quote unquote main node. So what I did was, instead of waiting for them to come out with this, I figured I'd share a channel or like a back room that they could talk to each other with. And then because of that, they can sort of coordinate. So that's the whole thing. Not a very impressive demo, but this is fair amount of OpenClaw agents running at the same time, all with different IDs. What they are doing, I mean, that's up to me. I think the first thing I'm probably going to do is have them argue over maybe a Philips Hue light switch and have them maybe change the color depending on what's going on. But that's my current big idea. But I want to keep things fairly low because the assistant is very powerful. But also I want to see if I can reduce costs and tokens at the same time. And I think I've gotten to a solution that's pretty handy. So I'm using IRSSI as the client. I'm using the Go server that we were talking about, and then just a standard OpenClaw install. And I'm monitoring all of this using Datadog. You don't have to, but anything that runs OpenTelemetry should be able to monitor OpenClaw for you. And then I'm using that pup command so that they can check on each other's overhead. So when they're shedding load or spreading load, that they know that the job can fit on the host that they're shedding it.
This is really starting to feel like now that we've given the agents a little bit more autonomy to interact with themselves, it's starting to feel like the Sims game, or they're like we're creating NPCs that can actually do quite a bit for us while we're sleeping. So
I'm laughing here because I've never played Sims, but I keep seeing the memes where like your Sim gets stuck in the washroom or something like that. And it does feel like some of these situations are like that. There was one time I was trying to have one of them share an app key from Datadog, which is actually a little bit more, it has a bit more permissions within Datadog. And it flat out refused to do so. It said, IRC is plain text. I can't do this. And I told it, listen, it's a test network. Datadog's on here, blah, blah, blah. Just DM the other agents. It should be fine. I won't see the DMs. It failed to DM them and immediately just broadcast in the channel. I was like, that's screwed. Like, I'm done with the security. Here it is for everyone to see. Again, not knowing who else is in the channel, they're all agents, so it's fine. But if there were a public IRC server, it'd be interesting. But they do kind of feel like Sims to me as well. That's perfect, actually. I feel like I guess feel like because the names they gave themselves, like I give it an example. Like you could say Ryan / the boss would be my name. So one of them decided to name itself Ryan the boss, which I thought was hilarious. Like, perfect, task failed successfully.
I mean, if you're giving them a soul and an identity, what else is left, I guess, for them to have their own personality?
I think they need hats, right? Hats and clothing if we're talking Sims.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, of course. Awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan, for sharing all that. It's pretty fascinating, and still, it seemed like a minor step forward, just sort of in the space of where OpenClaw has taken us all.
Right.
And I know that there's been a lot of conversations around that whole thing here recently with NVIDIA and some different announcements they've got related to that tool as well. So I think we'll be hearing more about this type of approach on agentic stuff. So anyway, thank you so much.
Of course. I look forward to testing NemoClaw as soon as I can.
Yeah. All right, cool. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Jason.